we're bashing our heads against the wall. We don't really have a democracy here in Israel. Israel is a democracy in name only, because a democracy means that you elect people to the government and they do what their voters want them to do. And that's not what happens here in Israel. Whatever, anytime the government decides to do something that the left doesn't agree with, it goes to the High Court of Justice. And again, with the NGOs supporting. And if you look at the docket in the High Court of Justice, you see that most of the cases that they see are Arabs from Judea and Samaria suing the Israeli government for something. Case after case after case. And there's this NGO, I don't even remember the name of it, that was representing the prisoners, the Nokba prisoners that were taken, the Hamas murderers from October 7th, argue in court that their diet isn't rich enough in fruits and vegetables. And the president of the Supreme Court says, my door is always open to you. I mean, we're really bashing our heads against the wall here. We're doing this to ourselves. Obviously, the European governments who are contributing, and the NGOs and so on and so forth, they're all responsible, but we're mostly responsible because we're letting it happen right here under our noses.
Look, all these issues are, I want to challenge you here a bit. All these issues are extremely painful and to most of us, highly personal. We all know people who died or were kidnapped, right, on October the 7th. We all know families whose dear ones are still held there. We all have friends who have, some of them died, were killed in the war, or continue to serve fourth round and fifth round and so on. At NGO Monitor, we still have two colleagues who are still in the reserve duty as we speak, and it's been 20 months. So it's them and their families. So all these issues are extremely emotional and personal. I have some of the things that these NGOs or these people say make my blood boil, literally. And yet, I don't have an issue with them taking it to the streets. I went to the theater last Thursday at Habima Square, and the big demonstration to stop the war and for hostages was there. And I was looking at the crowd that showed up. Some of these people were the families of the hostages, their friends. Some people showed up to show their support because they feel frustrated that there's nothing else to do. But some of these people were holding banners that made my stomach go upside down. Some of them were comparing the Israeli government to the Nazi regime. Some of them are seemingly conscious objectionists, so they were basically calling for no military army and so on and so on. But to me, as horrible as it was to read some of these things, this is democracy.
So I do not agree. I do not agree with you in the least there.
I know. And I'm deliberately being a little bit controversial here, right? I don't mind them doing that. What I mind is when it is funded by another government.
Look,
okay?
I think it's obvious to everyone that the demonstrations, first before the war, during the year before the war against the judicial reform, and then when the war started again, this was such an obviously massively funded operation. This wasn't grassroots, protests. These were, those billboards, the huge billboards on the Ayalon highway, they're extremely expensive. And the whole place is plastered with them. I know because, sometimes I give money, to these crowdfunding for a billboard. It's very, very expensive. You have to have a lot of money. And now we hear that USAID was contributing. They got through USAID almost $1 billion in the past few years. So, that's not the problem. The problem isn't people holding a picket sign on the corner. That's, I think we all agree that that's what democracy means, that you can say
I
whatever.
don't agree.
Freedom of speech is when you say things that are hard for people to
No,
hear, not
no,
when
no,
it's
no,
what
no.
you want to hear. But
Not quite, not quite, not quite, not quite, not quite.
having massively funded
by another
demos
state.
week after
Yeah.
week after week after week, that's not democracy.
It's
That's not
but at the end
democracy.
of the day, we're talking about an act of subversion. No country in the midst of the war applies democracy to the full extent that it would in a situation of normality. All you have to do is look at British wartime legislation, which was perfectly reasonable. They took these people and they separated them from the rest of society. Delinquents such as Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists were put to one side. You cannot have people disrupting the lives, the economy, and the functioning of a society in wartime. Democracy cannot be the be all and end all of everything. Democracy is great when we have the right conditions. There are conditions when democracy, as we perceive it in normal times, you may just have to suspend disruption, burning tires, so on and so forth. These are exceptional situations. Israel is facing a war on 7, 8, 9, 10 fronts. Now, people who harp on about democracy when Israel's in the midst of a war for its very existence don't have the right priorities. We can talk about democracy to its full extent in a situation of peace or relative calm. Sorry about that.
Well, I
I
beg to
want to
differ
go.
because it's very
Sorry,
hard
Huki.
to draw the
Sorry,
lines,
Huki. I
and
want to go in a different direction
what
here,
is
if you don't
used
mind.
against the left
Yeah.
can be used against the right, and it
It's
was
not a
used
matter.
against the right.
It's not a
That's
matter.
my
Yeah,
issue. My
yeah.
issue, go
I
back 20
understand.
years again,
But it's
where
not a matter.
people were arrested on their way to a protest. Before they even got to the protest, the buses were
Right,
stopped
right.
and
But there's a
people were arrested.
qualitative difference in the action. There's a
It doesn't
qualitative
matter in
difference.
that. I'm not
It
even
wasn't.
going to that point.
I know, but it's not a
That's not
wartime.
really democracy if only one side
I,
is allowed
I'm not.
to express
No, that's not
itself.
the point. I'm talking about in a situation of
I
war.
understand what you're saying. I
That's the
understand what you're
situation.
saying.
Left or right cannot disrupt an economy, a society, or demoralize a society in a wartime situation.
Yeah.
These certain things have to be curtailed. It's not normality. It's not Scandinavia. We're in the Middle East. We have people who have beheaded children, burnt children alive. Our first priority has to deal with this. Democracy to its
You're
full
going to have to
extent.
find another example. Scandinavia doesn't work anymore.
Not anymore. Not anymore. But we'd be on the road to that if we let it continue. That's what I'm saying.
Let's do another conversation on democracy, because I think that's another 19 minutes, as Olga said. 19 minutes won't be enough to cover all these topics. So I think we already realized
But
that
we agree that we
funds
don't live in democracy anyway, so there's
are
no
going to.
democracy to suspend.